Hey guys, this is Coffeeyay for Husng.com. I'm here with you for part 3B of my Math and Heads and Sit and Go series. It's 3B because it's supposed to be a continuation of part 3, talking about shoving. So just wanted to sort of really quickly review where we left off. We discussed the binary shove or fold decision making. So whether we want to shove or just fold. We solved it for some post-flop situations where we're raising or jamming and want to know fold equity and pot equity are required to make the shove. But we left off pre-flop to software because just doing it by hand was pointless. So what I'm going to do today is talk about how we can use Icmizer to do pre-flop decision making for us, especially this shove or fold decision. So Icmizer is specifically built to solve the decision for us. That's actually how it does things. It compares things always to folding. It's something to keep in mind because I know that, for instance, Mercenary oftentimes in his charts will compare decision to equity at start of hand. Icmizer is built to solve whether folding or shoving is better for the most part. And so notice that in that spot, that will mean that it'll be using the same convention that I've been using throughout this video, that folding is forced to be equal to 0, and we just solve for things that are greater than it. So our inputs for this will be villain's range. That's the whole point of using software, is that we don't input random frequencies. We're just importing a whole range. And so if we're looking at open shoving, all we need to do is input villain's calling range. If we're 3-bet shoving, we need two things. We need villain's opening range as well as his 3-bet range. And so once we fix those things, we can use Icmizer to produce the answer as to whether shoving is better than folding. It does so, the answer is in the form of a chart of all the hands that you consider doing this for. So it's awesome. It just solves it all in one go, gives you the entire matrix of what hands are going to be better. It even also shows you how much better it is for every hand, which is going to be really important once we start constructing strategies. Just before we dive in to using Icmizer, I want to talk about some of the complications. So as we've been doing so far in this series, we are dealing with binary decision making, shove or fold in this case. And so obviously it's not going to take into account all the complexities. So it's not going to take into account the equity of min-raising or limping. So open shoving, even though it's more profitable than folding, can still be less profitable than min-raising or limping. Out of position, it doesn't take into account the equity of flatting or 3-betting non-all-in. However, unlike the break-even points in the chart, it produces, it gives the amount that shoving is better than folding. Sorry, a little typo. It gives you how much it's better than folding. So before, when we talked about these break-even points, always said that for equities greater than it, we should take the action. Here it will actually tell us how much greater than folding it is. So that'll mean that later in the series, when we're constructing strategies, we can still use Icmizer once we have an estimate of other equities. We can still use it to rank our decisions. All right, so let's just dive in and let's start talking about open shoving. So to deal with open shoving, we have to fix some calling ranges. So at deeper stacks, we sort of have two options. We can just fix some standard calling range, ace-8 off, ace-7 suited, pocket fours plus, king queen, something like that. Or just look at how specific hands will vary at different ranges. And in fact, I think that that's going to be the most profitable way to look at it, because deeper stacked, we're not looking to open shove very much. There's going to be some specific hands that we're interested in. And so looking at how specific hands vary with the calling ranges is a really unique feature of Icmizer that we can exploit to make that thing easier. While at shorter stacks, I think a better approach, especially better than just using some standard calling range off the top of your head, is to use ranges that try to model a population tendency. So my approach to this is kind of first order, and it's just use the average frequencies at which I'm getting my open shoves called, and then just apply a top percent range to that frequency. And here we're going to exploit Icmizer's different ordering scheme to try to pick a good top percent range. It's one of the really cool features of Icmizer is that you can actually use your own ordering to create a top percent range, or you can use the different orderings that they have, including ones that are specifically good for calling ranges, specifically good for pushing ranges. So that's going to make our life a lot easier. So let's start out with deeper stacked. So because we're deeper stacked, the shove fold binary is already kind of a bad approximation. So and we can reassure ourselves of this by fixing ace-8 off plus a7 suited, pocket fours plus king queen as a calling range, just computing our equity. We can just see what the equities look like, just to get a sense that we probably shouldn't be open shoving ace king. We shouldn't be open shoving many hands. However, we can also fix hands that we're strongly considering open shoving, whether we've seen it in a training video, have our own idea that it's good, are thinking about it. Specifically the ones that we want to think about probably are low pocket pairs and weak ace-x. These are the kind of hands that a lot of people say that we should be shoving, mares, and I do too. I mean, I say that we should be shoving low pocket pairs and hyper turbos, and so we can look at what that equity looks like and how it'll vary with different calling ranges. And we can also try to find sort of a point where shoving weak ace-x seems pretty reasonable. And so we can just compute open shoving range for these specific hands and see how it varies with calling range. Again, that's going to be a really cool feature of Icmizer. So, all right, I'm going to just jump in and we'll start using Icmizer now. All right, so I'm in Icmizer now. So we're talking about deeper stacks. So I'm going to fix stacks at 500. Obviously, if you're playing turbos or you're playing merge, you should explore other stack sizes. I'm a hyper turbo player, so I'm just gonna use a deep stack to mean 25 big blinds. But obviously you can adjust that any way you want. It obviously deals with effective stacks, so you don't even really need to adjust both numbers. So we're in the small blind, so we need to make sure we have heroes small blind selected. Make sure to use chip EV, set the blinds so that you know what you're doing. Players, everything's fine. So in small blind we can just assign any sort of calling range. You can even just assign the Nash calling range if you care about it. It's like 17%. That's kind of wide. But yeah, actually this seems fairly reasonable. It's maybe a little bit wide in practice because obviously in practice people aren't open shoving Nash. They're also not playing push fold. But whatever, let's just maybe make it a little bit more realistic. As we said, like ace-8 off, pocket fours plus, king queen, maybe king jack suited plus. All right. And just calculate. And what it'll give us is the equities of open shoving all these different hands. And so again, like it gives us decent information, but I mean, notice that like king queen off is like half a big blind better than folding. So so again, like it's not that good. Ace king is like what? It's plus 40, so plus 2 BBs. So plus 2 BBs better than folding. So like 1.5 from start hand. Like ace king off will just do so much better min raise called. It plays really well in a min raise pot, etc. On the other hand, we can consider some hands like pocket twos. Pocket twos, on the other hand, is not going to play very well in a min raise pot. And so with pocket twos, pocket threes, pocket fours, we want to strongly consider shoving. And so one of the really cool things about Icmizer is we can just fix the hand pocket twos, and then we can go to the hand EV chart. And what it'll show us is how pocket twos changes in equity with a change in calling range. So you can see that that's the big feature of pocket twos is that it's got a really flat expectation. It really doesn't matter too much how much villain calls. And in fact, the more villain calls, sort of the worse expectation goes. Notice these little jumps. That's mostly going to be due to discontinuities, like when you add in connected hands. Connected hands fare much better than disconnected high card hands. The ordering is, of course, done using high card hands. So we can see that, as long as the villain really isn't calling really, really wide, pocket twos is going to be fine. And yeah, your expectation falls, but we can follow along and see that it's pretty much always going to be at least around 0 EV from start of hand, probably around 0.10. I think that 25% is already a really wide calling range, and so this is probably a decent estimate of something like half a small blind. And you can see if villain does become very tight and calls tighter than threes, ace-4 suited, ace-8 off plus, king-10 suited, which they likely do, it starts shooting up. And so that's one thing to realize, is that we really do want villain calling us pretty tight. But even if he calls us light, I mean, even if he calls us like, what, 84% of hands, we're still okay doing it. That's why pocket twos is such a great idea to shove, because the upside's pretty big. I mean, if we can get him to be really tight, like top 10%, fives plus, ace 8 suited, ace 10 off plus, it's not even that absurdly tight. We're doing quite well, 0.213. And obviously, if we change our hand to pocket fours, we can calculate again. Go to hand EV again. Because I probably didn't even have to, might not have to calculate again. Things change a little bit. Notice that pocket fours, just because it is so strong, actually starts increasing with calling range. So that's actually really interesting to know. And that's why, in my belief, most cases it can be better to min-raise call pocket fours. Because if we can induce our villain to shove wider, if we can induce our villain to go wider than his 10% range and go into like a 20% range or a 25% range, we actually do significantly better. We can lastly do this maybe with pocket threes as well, just to kind of convince ourselves of some of these things. So pocket threes is a little, again, it doesn't increase quite as much. And so that's why, I'm of the opinion that probably shoving pocket threes is going to be really good. I think villains are pretty tight at the opening range. So, expecting him to call something like 10% isn't unreasonable. If he calls 15%, that's not the end of the world. And, it's a nice benefit that if they are, loose calling stations, you get a little bit extra EV. It's pretty close. The one major problem with, trying to min-raise and induce a wider range to get into this zone and get your EV to go up is obviously that we don't really play very well post-flop. So, while maybe we'll induce a few more 3-bets, we won't induce calls. So that's kind of cool. Let's also look at maybe ace 2 off. I think that's another hand that maybe you'd want to consider open shoving.